Hello and welcome to OttaTalk, the City of Ottawa's podcast series where we talk with staff about city programs, projects, and initiatives. Today we will talk about the city's annual budget, how it is put together, and how can residents have input. We're going to make your tax dollars make sense.
Our theme music to start the show today is titled Rappelle-moi by Jolie. We begin and end every podcast with a local artist featured on the City Sounds playlist on SoundCloud. You, our dear listener, can find a link to our playlist in our show notes, and you'll hear more from Jolie at the end of the podcast. It's one more reason to stay until the end. My name is Shirley Mann. I'm from the Public Works Department, where I'm a leadership coach and strategist. And that means I have the pleasure of working with supervisors, managers, and directors on leadership and team development.
And my name is Mike Reed. I'm a media relations officer with the City of Ottawa, which makes me a newsman, basically. Shirley, so what's your experience with the city budget process?
Ooh, I have to admit, Mike, I don't actually have a lot of experience with the city budget process. I did get a hot tip from a fellow team member in our podcast group here to check out the city's website. It's as simple as ottawa.ca/budget. So I did take some time to poke through the website, and I learned there's actually quite a lot of tools out there to help residents understand a little bit more about the city budget and the process that it goes through. So that was pretty exciting. And truthfully, the most experience I have with a budget really is just probably managing my own household budget. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. Any city programs or services we talk about will be in the program notes wherever you're streaming this podcast, or you can search for them on the city website, ottawa.ca. The program notes also have a link to the city's YouTube channel, where you'll find our entire podcast archive. If you have a comment or question about any of our podcasts, send us a message at podcast-balado@ottawa.ca.
So now I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about Cyril Rogers. After graduating from Memorial University in Newfoundland and Labrador, Cyril spent more than a decade working mostly in the telecommunications industry before joining the City of Ottawa's finance department in 2013. Today, Cyril is the city's chief financial officer and the general manager of the finance and corporate services department. Cyril, welcome to OttaTalk.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So getting into it, especially with your previous experience, to a lot of people, accounting and numbers are the same everywhere. But what would you say is the biggest difference between doing what you do now in the public sector compared to when you were in the private sector?
That's a great question. And I think I'm going to back up a little bit and give you a long-winded answer because I think it's important. Being an accountant was not part of my plan. As a kid, my plan was always to be a phys ed teacher. I grew up in a very small town in Newfoundland, as you mentioned at the beginning. My community was actually resettled from a small island off the coast of Newfoundland in the 60s. So it was very much a small fishing town. We had about 4 small communities, 1,200 people. So it was very much a community-oriented upbringing. We never had a lot, but everyone just kind of helped out. Everyone was an aunt and uncle. Everyone knew everybody. I joke that my community actually developed Facebook. We just didn't know how to do the technology side because if I did something wrong in the community, someone knew before I knew I did something wrong, and then my mom would know by the time I got home. So a very type of culture where everybody got along, collaborative community feel. Then as I graduated, my teachers at the time kind of convinced me not to be a phys ed teacher, to be something more. They thought I could be something more. So I started on my journey. I started off university, planned to be an engineer, did a lot of science courses, math courses. Didn't know if I wanted that. And then finally I did a business degree and said, start somewhere. My girlfriend, wife now at the time, it was very lucky that she hooked on to me. She was recruited out of university into Nortel. So we moved to Ottawa in 1999 and really put our roots down, I guess. And my first job was with Nortel in the finance section. And it just kind of steambolled from there. So really, I had a business degree. I was working in finance. And then I got my accounting designation. Really much always about operations, really involved with everybody and anybody. trying to solve issues, trying to figure things out. So then my career just evolved from there. In the 2006-7 timeframe, I was contemplating a career change. I was actually pretty deep in the process for a firefighter and a Ottawa Police Services police. But I just decided not to do that. And I think why that's important is it kind of goes back to my community roots and who I am as a person. And the irony of all that is when I left iTech, I wanted more. Like I was missing the contribution back to my community. Like, what was my purpose? I've now got, 15 years of experience. I've been living in a new city, which is now my home, my community. And how do I get that feeling of community back? So that's why I came to the City of Ottawa. And the irony in all that is, in my journey here at the city, I was also the CFO at Ottawa Police for almost 2 years. And indirectly, I support fire. So as much as I might have been trying to do a career shift, I kind of landed there indirectly through my journey here and working where I live. And I call this city my city. And what I can say in that journey of, becoming a CFO and an accountant that didn't want to be an accountant, I think things landed where they should be. And I can honestly say this organization is the most complex organization that I ever worked in. Having worked at, Nortel, TELUS, BlackBerry, Alcatel. This is a very unique organization. It's one of the best organizations I ever worked in. And I truly feel like I work at home in the community. I always joke that we have every profession besides an astronaut. I don't think we have an astronaut on staff, but I think every other profession we do have on staff. And that makes it really challenging, but really rewarding. And budgeting, I try and keep it to the 101 level. The reality is at the end of the day, my goal, my objective is to ensure that I maximize the value of every service we do here. And again, it's for my community. So I probably have more fiscal diligence and responsibility with my job's budget than my own budget, because I take it very professionally and personally that I'm managing not only my money, but everyone else's money. So I'm ultimately accountable for 1 million plus people's dollars. So I need to make sure I treat that as my own. And I really feel like my budget here is really my budget. Obviously supported by a great team and a great colleagues and all that, but that's how I come to work. I come to work in terms of, budgeting for my city, for my home, and for every resident in the City of Ottawa.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that, Cyril. Your journey, your evolution through your career. I really like what you ended off with there, that you like to think of it, from a budgeting 101 perspective. And you feel sort of a responsibility to help people understand what's happening with their money. So let's take that idea. Let's do some budgeting 101. And when I think of budgeting 101, I think that most people are probably the most familiar with budgeting when they think about when they run their own household. And like you were saying, like your own household budget. Or maybe people are familiar with managing a budget for like a project or an event they run. So a penny for your thoughts, Cyril. How useful would it be for our residents who are tuning in to compare the two, their household budget and the city's budget?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the other thing I like to highlight as well is, this term of council has been really about, increasing information, the transparency, the digestibility of complex issues. And one of the new products that we created this term of council was the Budget Magazine, and really talking about the budget that way. So when we talk about, an operating budget versus a capital budget. So in the context of your household, your operating budget would be items as your groceries, your monthly, cable bill, if you still have cable, your monthly insurance, those type of daily expenditures that you incur, versus when you look at the capital side of the equation, if you're planning for a new roof or you're planning for, a new set of windows or maybe even an addition to the house, that will be what we would consider like a capital investment. And what's important to understand there is, linking that back to some of the guiding things that we use at the city, and I'll use the term of council priorities as an example. Much of the budget is really based on, like your home budget, you need to prioritize where you're going to spend your money. So if you're planning on, you have kids, you need a car, you're planning for their education, you like to put a pool in, you might need to do a new roof in 5 years, you might need to do some renovations to your basement, all those things. I think when you're at home, you sit down and say, I can't afford to do this all at once, but I'm going to plan that out. And that's really where the term of council priorities comes into play. It really focuses a set of priorities that this term focuses on, and that helps guides us in terms of where and how we invest in an affordable way. So we know that, we need to be affordable. We have a great city that we live in, and we can't do everything at once. So really you need to prioritize. So if your roof needs to be replaced and you'd like to have a new pool, chances are you're going to do your roof first and maybe do the pool in a couple of years. Plan it out for a little bit. And that's really how I've been planning the city's finances, really in that same type of simplicity way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. When I was doing my very light research, I learned that, like you say, the planning actually happens far in advance. And so one of the things that I've learned very recently is that the budget process is a year-round process. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I've learned that it really begins with something called the Budget Directions Report. So I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about that.
I think that's another great thing that we have here. And I can honestly say, a lot of municipalities don't have this process that we follow. I get connected a lot from CFOs, treasurers across the province, across the country, really understanding how we do it and why we do it that way. And the direction report really helps continue with the engagement. So the budget process is a full 365-day process at the city. But the directions report really takes that next step in terms of, it's almost like, Christmas is December 25th every year. Most people don't start Christmas shopping in March, but they start thinking about it in that August, September timeframe because it's getting close. So that directions report really allows staff to come forward with a framework where council can endorse to give us some parameters in terms of what that list needs to look like. So again, people are probably starting thinking about, if you have young kids, time to start thinking about, the wish list that you put on your list. Usually in September, October at my house, that's what we do. The kids start building their list and we help kind of start big, but then we kind of tailor that down, right? Set the expectations. And really that's the purpose of the directions report. It's really allows counselors the opportunity to start engaging more because it's now coming. It's around the corner and they can really start thinking about the mindset of what that means come November 12th when we table that budget. It allows a little bit of foresight in terms of narrowing the bookends for staff to kind of work with the organization and really fit in those priorities. Again, we know what the term of council priorities are. Now we just need a little bit more refinement in terms of what are the end books that we need to work within to really get that meaningful product on November 12th.
What a great comparison to a Christmas wish list. What do you think, Mike?
It was perfect. I've got to build my list. So now that your team has the directions report, and the draft budget will be presented to council in November. What is the process leading up to that for your team? I know you went a little bit into that, but what are the challenges with integrating those budget directions into the draft?
So again, I don't want to go too complex, but we have a wide range of financial reports, financial frameworks. If you look at the infrastructure reports, the rate long-range financial plan, the solid waste long-range financial plan, the transit affordability, all these things that we continuously update council on a regular basis, and the public for that matter, those are all building blocks that helps us put into that final product. The team has been working closely with all the departments kind of planning. So we also do monthly reporting from a financial perspective. And what that monthly reporting does is it reports the actual monthly spending to your actual budget that you set. So come January, we're already started to look at how things are shaping up in the current budget. So we're already looking at how this, where are our pressure points coming into the next budget cycle. And now we're in that what we call a deep dive. So now we have an established direction. Now we're working closely with every department and helping them understand, okay, what are your key priorities in your department and where do they fit into the term of council priorities? Where do they fit into all these robust financial plans that have been adopted and improved by council? The transportation master plan is another one. And then start prioritizing those things. So we know that we need to continue to pay staff to deliver the great services that they deliver. We know that we need to, make sure we budget for the utility bills. We need to continue to pay the utilities, the water, the hydro, the electricity, the natural gas. We need to continue to invest in what we currently have. So we start, allocating funds to those initiatives. And then we start looking, okay, what are the new initiatives or new investments that need to align with the either term of council priorities or the other council approved financial plans. And then that's how we kind of build that list. And then we start reviewing that at a global SLT level. So all the senior leaders then get engaged in terms of understanding where the core pressures are. So we're not competing with each other, right? I have 3 boys, and we've always been clear that, all 3 boys are equal. We love them the same, but differently, much like the GMs. I love them all, but I love them differently. And I don't have favorites, right? So the key is, again, trying to tie that back to my household. I don't treat one kid better than the other. I have 2 dogs, two different dogs, completely different dogs. I love them both. And, if one gets a treat, the other one gets a treat. So really, it's a fairness factor. So really working collaboratively with the team, understanding their pressure points. But of course, then there's differences and exceptions. So my oldest is off to university. My second guy is in college. A little difference in the pay scale of the programs and the costs, but they need to understand where they're at. So it doesn't mean I'm giving the second guy, topping him up because his education may be a little more affordable. It's really about understanding where they're at and what services they're delivering, all while ensuring every department's got the resources they need to deliver those services that we've been directed to deliver.
I love this continual comparison to your family. It's working really well so far. So when people think of a budget, I'm going to guess that most people think, right, a budget, revenues, expenses. That makes sense. So revenues for a household would be income from jobs. Expenses are anything from groceries, gas, utilities, you named it. So people think money in, money out. When we think of the city's revenues, most often we think of property taxes, but there are others, right? Yes. What would they be?
So the property taxes, that generates about 48% of our overall revenue, so our overall income. Then we have different structures. So our water and wastewater system is guided by what we call a rate program. So those fees to cover the cost of that program is part of your water bill. So that's outside of the property tax bill. As an example, that would be like a user fee. If you partake in a swimming lesson at the city, you need to pay the cost of that swimming lesson. So that's another source of revenue that we get come in. Then when you look at the social services department, a lot of that funding is funneled through the city by the province. So the province provides the funding for like in certain cases, long-term care, some housing initiatives, employment, social equity, where they give the city and the municipalities the funding and we administer their program. Paramedics, as an example, 50% of the normal paramedics is funded by the province, 50% is funded by the city. So there's many different, development charges, building permits, a full spectrum of that other 52%. So I know, normally people get fixated on the property tax component and they forget about the other components and revenue items that we have. And one other important thing that they lose sight of is the efficiencies. So this term of council, in the previous 3 budgets, more to come in this budget, we've generated over $207 million worth of savings. So again, that's my commitment to making sure that we have a robust, fiscally responsible organization supported by council, supported by the senior leadership team, the commitment of the culture of the organization. So again, much like your house, you always want to make sure, it's not a bad idea every year when your insurance comes up for renewal, start sniffing around. I call it sniffing around. Make a few phone calls. You don't necessarily have to do it every year, but at least every 2 years, you should start thinking about shopping your insurance around because there's an opportunity there to get savings. No different than, technology as advances from cable television, all those suite of things, bundling your things together where you can kind of get economies of scale. So the same ideas that we go through at the city in terms of ensuring that we can maximize the value of those dollars so that, if we get $1 of revenue come in, if I can contribute $1.25 or $1 plus of value back, that's good value for money. So that's kind of the culture that we're living and breathing in the organization. So it's not only about the revenue coming in, it's also about reducing the costs of the requirement of that revenue to come in.
Fascinating.
Okay, so if that's the revenue side, that's the money in. What are the city's expenses? And we could talk, the difference between operating versus capital budget, or we can talk about all the services that the city provides, which will be here for an hour. But what are the main, I suppose, expenses when you think of the budget? What are we talking about there?
Again, I'm gonna stick on my storyline of you wake up in the morning. I imagine whether you have an alarm clock or you naturally wake up, as soon as that alarm clock goes off, that's a city service, right? There's electricity, you got to go to that alarm clock to make that wake up. You go use the washroom, brush your teeth, take a shower, city services. You leave your house, you drive on the road, city services. Hopefully you're using the transit system, you ride the bus, you get to work. By the time you wake up in the morning and your feet comes out of the bed to the time you take your feet off the floor and go back to bed, you probably touched 154 different services. And really, you don't notice and realize that. Obviously, some of the tangible things is, today was garbage day for me. So my boys put the garbage out, thank you, every Wednesday. And we're a family of 5 with 2 dogs. And we're really diligent in terms of how we recycle and adhere to the 3-bag limit. We never have 3 bags, by the way. But, for a very small cost, my garbage and my recyclables are picked up at my curve every 2 weeks. This Mother Nature is coming around the corner as the squirrels are taking the acorns off my tree. When the snow falls, our services are pretty good. Like by the time you get to go to work at, when you leave your house, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, streets are pretty much cleared. So the staff are out overnight clearing the streets. If you travel across the city, from your fire services, your paramedic services, those are all services you see and touch every day. That's really there. And then, of course, the infrastructure. So it's, building a large type infrastructure like the LRT. Those are infrastructure projects that will benefit, generations in the future. And you got to build for the future, plan for the future. We're a growing city. So I come in, commute to downtown from Stittsville, and now you're starting to see some of the trains out in the West End, Moody, starting running the line a little bit. So it's starting to get really exciting when you start to see, this long journey of building a massive light rail system in the city of Ottawa. It's always growing pains when you if you've ever built a new house, lots of growing pains. So when you think about the large scale projects and now you're starting to see movement, you're starting to see reality come to life, it really changes the perception of where the money goes. So those are some of the core things that you can see around the city. One of the things I do every summer is me and my wife like to do a lot of biking. So we've biked the entire city, been to numerous cafes, craft beers, theaters. The city has it all. So, really partaking in all the city's services, the functions, the infrastructure to enjoy the city is the commitment that we made in the last couple of years. So you can't leave your house. You can't even wake up in the morning without having a city service. So it's everywhere.
Absolutely. Hearing you talk about all of these, the services, the infrastructure, what I think of in the context of this conversation is that they all need to be funded, and they're all in a different way a priority. And so I'm so curious, with so many different priorities out there that need funding, how do the staff make decisions on where to allocate the funds?
So that's where we work closely with our colleagues. So if you look from an infrastructure perspective, Tammy Rose and her team in infrastructure services, again, they have very robust asset management plans, policies, procedures that help guide the direction of where the money should go. And it's always in the context, again, of if you look at the road network, I always joke with Tammy, if I give you a blank check and tell you to go deliver on everything you want to do, can you commit to me and tell me that within 12 months, you'll do all that work? If you don't, you need to pay me back double. And she'll never take that bet. And the reason why she won't is because we can't shut the city down. So when you look at, artery roads, Bayside Road, Woodruff, Greenbank, etc., you can't be doing Woodruff and Greenbank at the same time. right? It's just a natural flow of traffic. So that's the lens that you really need to put on when you look at the prioritization component of it. Again, very robust policies and procedures and criteria. But again, if you were to really make that simple, I don't think residents would be very happy if we're doing Woodruff and Greenbank at the same time. You're really shutting down two major north-south arteries to get to the communities that we live in. So that's kind of, the policies and procedures are there to do that. But fundamentally, that's the reality. We can't do everything at once. So when you talk about priorities, it goes back to, if you have 20 priorities, you have no priorities because you need to prioritize your priorities. So really, that's how we kind of work with the asset management plans, the transportation master plans, the official plan, which drives the growth of the city in the future, and planning for that. So really, all these plans kind of come together and kind of help guide that, where things need to be invested, when things need to be invested. If I look at like in this year, in 2025, or in last year, we had a new fire station out in the West End. So we don't do a fire station every year. So, that was a pretty significant investment from a city infrastructure perspective. We've been also building a, pretty robust infrastructure investment in Addis-Hoke. So that's another big project that's coming online. So there's always big projects being done, but they're all phased at times in terms of what makes sense with the plan. And of course, the market and the capacity to have the trades, have the availability of resources to build the infrastructure as well. So, we are a growing city. We're a growing city across all domains, whether it's private, public, federal. So it's a really unique situation that we're in terms of all the opportunities that are here and really managing the priority and the investment and the timing of those investments.
Yeah. And on top of those different priorities and making those decisions, I'm sure like a lot of people, the city's also feeling financial pressures, right? So what kind of financial pressures is the city looking at? What do we need to consider when we're thinking about those sorts of pressures as well?
I think it's, this term of council and the mayor, he's been quite open in terms of the fairness campaign and really seeking that support from upper levels of government. As a municipality, we're obviously the lowest tier from a government perspective, and we don't have a lot of tools, right? There's not a lot of revenue tools in our toolbox by nature of the system of the legislation and the way things are structured. So I think it's important to continue, the mayor continues to advocate for, our fair share in terms of investment into, city assets that benefit the community at large, benefit the province or even the country for that matter. We are the nation's capital. That's a very unique domain for any municipality in the country. That's what makes us unique in terms of having that large federal sector presence. So that does present different challenges. So I think it's important that people understand that, when you look at where taxes go, so, there's a stat that be out there from different associations that the municipalities only collect about 8% of all taxes, contributed to. But we deliver over 80% of the services. So, the other challenging part from a municipal level is we're one of the only municipal or levels of government that we send a bill to the resident. So when you look at your, the federal taxes and the provincial taxes, you don't get a bill. That's taken right off your income. It's taken right off, when you gas up at the pumps, you buy a shirt or clothes, all those taxes are collected before you even contribute, like as you contribute to it. You don't get a bill. So I think people need to understand that reality of it. We are sending you a bill. Unfortunately, we're kind of letting you know that we're charging you versus federal, provincially, you don't get a bill. So it's the psychology of, where your money goes because, when you get your paycheck, sometimes you don't realize that a lot of that money is already funneled away through the taxation system that goes to the federal, provincial level, not the municipality. But we turn around and send the bill out. So we kind of remind you to pay for the service, the great services you get, versus I don't seem to be paying for healthcare. I don't seem to be paying for education because I don't notice it because it's already coming off my paycheck every 2 weeks. So it's a little bit of a difference there that, I would encourage residents to kind of have that sober second thought about how much taxes do I really pay globally and what do I get for those taxes and where does that go, right? I think that's a good thing that kind of level sets me. And then I do that with my kids when as they go in their teens and young men or whatever, as they age, like having that conversation at the dinner table about finances and planning and budgeting and understanding where your money goes. When you get that first job, my kids, $15 an hour, minimum wage, they do the math. It's like, okay, I'm going to get this much money on my paycheck. The paycheck shows up. It's like, huh? Where did that, like the calculator says this. Oh, but let's walk through your paycheck here, son. Let's talk about where your taxes go and the garnishes and all that go. Well, that's not fair. Well, let's walk through life here. So that's kind of the conversation that you kind of introduce the kids at that level in terms of how the system, now the taxation process works.
Mm-hmm. It's all about understanding the variety of external factors, that come into play there. So let's, since you brought it back to talking about your sons, let's bring it back to the household analogy. And, you might have a household budget, you've set money aside in these different buckets, but then boom, something unexpected happens that year. Your cat or dog needs a surprise visit to the vet, the car breaks down, or a tree falls on the house. Now, if we're thinking about the city's budget, the city might experience flooding or a derecho or some other natural disaster like we have been more and more each year. Cyril, talk to us a little bit about how these unexpected events can impact the city's budget.
So what we have at the city is we have what we call reserves. I think there's 21, 23 different reserves and different specific uses. Really, they're your savings account. So, we have policies and fiscal frameworks, financial frameworks in place to guide what target we should be having in those reserves. One of the main ones is our tax stabilization reserve. So we've been putting money aside every year, typically through our annual surpluses. So again, we're really fiscally responsible where we typically have surpluses in an annual cycle. And we've built up a significant balance there. And we also do a lot of risk management at the city. So we guide the risk with the financials as well. So pre-2017, we didn't see derechoes, tornadoes in the city. So we recently updated some of our policies where we now start to bring in that lens into our financial risks, where we look at factors in terms of, what are some of the cost issues that we've had with those one-off types of events. And we've adjusted to ensure that we have a target balance that we try and strive for. And what I can say is we've exceeded that balance. So we set money aside. Now, also what we do is if you look at this 2025 budget year, it's September, we've had a good hot summer. But unfortunately, I got to remind you that January, February, March, April was a very, very harsh winter. Winter operations incurred significant snowfall, back-to-back snowfall, which led to significant costs in terms of trucking snow out of the downtown core and different parts of the city. And, expenditures well over 24 million over budget. So the city, as discussions, we implemented a discretionary spending freeze. And really what that meant was, where there's things that are not required for frontline services. So if we can not attend a certain conference or do it virtually or not, kind of scale back some of the purchasing of office supplies, things that don't directly impact delivering a service where we can save money. And we also implemented a hiring pause in terms of, kind of constraining our costs to make sure we can offset that. And in my latest report from a Q2 forecast perspective, we're forecasting pretty much close to a balanced budget overall, more or less. So we're able to absorb that overspending. So because we are very large and complex, different departments incur different costs at different times. But when they do that, we have mitigation strategies in place where we kind of offset that. So we're not pulling from our savings account. So even though we have money set aside to address it if needed, we also plan to offset that in year by kind of owning back on some of the planned expenditures that are not priority. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach.
So as city employees, we're pretty tuned in generally, at least more than possibly the average person in Ottawa. Why is it important for everyday residents to engage with the city on the budget process? Why is it important to participate in that? And how would you get involved if you've never gotten involved in the budget process before?
I think I'm going to stick to my story of the household. I think it's important for at home or in your personal budgeting that you do look at your expenses on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis for that matter, just have a sense that, you understand where you are spending your money. In the world of a debit card and electronic technology, sometimes money doesn't feel real anymore. Like, back in the day, my grandmother, I can remember when the ATM became popular in Newfoundland, which was probably many, many years later, given Newfoundland sometimes behind. My grandmother and then the older folks in the community would be, were stressed out that the money's got to go back under the mattress. Like, how can a machine take my money, and how can the card, how do I know what I'm spending if I'm just tapping and tapping? So I think there's an accountability there where you should be reviewing your monthly finances, much like we do at the city. So when it goes back to that reporting, we report out to the public, we talk about where we spend our money. So I think it's important for people to understand where their money goes, much like their own money. And from a public perspective, you can use their counselors at any point in time throughout the year to discuss budget issues. One of the things we do ward budget consultations. We did some in the spring. Really, this time of year is where they really start to elevate. And I can tell you, as time consuming as it is, typically I try and attend most, if not all of them. But what it gives me is the opportunity to go from all sides of the city, and a very broad city, and listen to those residents that come out and ask questions or trying to get a better understanding. And again, we are a very large community, very diverse community, and the needs change from one ward to the other. If I'm in, Councillor Kelly's ward on a Monday night, and I'm in Councillor Leaper's on another night, or out in the East End with Councillor Kitts the next night, within a week, I'm hearing 4 different ward issues and priorities. That gives me the opportunity to really understand the demographics, the challenges, the diversity, and all the different constraints that the city has globally across the network, versus, just doing the one-off. So I think it's a very good opportunity for me, and I've been doing that for probably 8-9 years now, where I do try and get out to each and every one where possible, because it really allows me to understand the complexities, the differences, the challenges, and how it all kind of fits together.
Excellent. The budget is such a big topic, and we've talked about so many themes: revenues and expenses, operating and capital budgets, reserve funds, etc. Mike's told me about the binders. He says they're as thick as New York City phone books. I have one more question for you, Cyril, and I want to make it a fun one. So can you tell us and our listeners a fun fact that you have about the budget?
I am a superstitious guy. My mother was very, very superstitious, too superstitious. She still is superstitious. And growing up with that superstitious type mom, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't like talking about this, but I also put lucky pennies in my pocket. So one of the things I do, just little memorabilia, and those pennies have value and they have significance to them, where they came from, where I got them. So I do have a couple of things like that of memorabilia that I put in my suit or my shoes on tabling day, and the return on adoption day, where I really leveraged that superstition. Again, going back to my community and my upbringing, that's kind of a little bit of a fun fact.
That is a fun fact, and what a wonderful personal connection you have to it as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So this is the end of the podcast, but not the end of the conversation. Remember, visit ottawa.ca for more information about the programs you heard about here. Be on the lookout for upcoming announcements about more City of Ottawa podcasts. That's when we OttaTalk about something completely different. Thank you, Cyril.
Thank you.
And to play us out, here is a little more of Rappelle-moi by Jolie from the City Sounds playlist on SoundCloud.
Combien de fois t'amuses à